Chapter 6 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6.
By God,
Eddie Zimmer swore.
it is Caesar Wirtz. Are you sure he isn't your brother-in-law? He might have married your sister under another name.
It doesn't seem possible to me, I said. Jan told me her husband was 37 years old and was a better-looking guy than I am.
That doesn't describe Wirtz, that's a cinch. He must be at least 60.
He turned to one of the cops who was standing near.
You say this guy has papers with the name of Joseph Gillian on him?
Yeah, we got a billfold with an Arkansas driver's license made out to Joseph Gillian, and a marriage license for Joseph Gillian and Janice Howard. A handkerchief in his pocket has a G initial on it. Funny thing, though, no laundry marks on his clothes that we can find. Maybe when we get him undressed we can do better.
Thanks,
Eddie told him. Then he raised his voice.
Well, I guess that's Joe Gillian, all right. I don't see how it could be anybody else but Joe Gillian.
I wonder if maybe he was losing his mind.
Come on, Chief,
he said, taking me by the arm.
We might as well shove off. Nothing we can do here.
We started walking back to his car. You blow your stack or something? I asked. You know that's not Joe Gillian.
Sure I know, but somebody went to a lot of trouble to make us think it was Joe Gillian, so it might be smart to play along for a while. I'll see that all the stories in the papers say that it was Gillian who was killed. Then in a couple of weeks, or less if we're lucky, we'll have somebody make another identification, and it'll turn out to be Caesar Wirtz.
Maybe Wirtz has friends who will wonder where he is.
Wirtz doesn't have any family. I happen to know that. You told me he was going away on a trip, didn't you?
I wonder where his car is, I said.
We'll find it abandoned someplace unless it's been stolen and repainted.
Zimmer lit a cigarette as we drove across the bridge and got back into Manhattan.
You know, this case is beginning to shape up. It's forming a pattern, and somebody is mighty scared.
What do you mean?
Well, look at it this way, Chief. Your sister gets poisoned. That's an accident. Couldn't be any other way. Then you get beat up as a warning to keep your nose out of the whole affair. That was a mistake.
You mean those guys intended to beat up somebody else? I asked.
No, they intended to beat you up, but beating you was a mistake. If nobody had bothered you at all, you'd have gone away of your own accord and nothing would have happened. But they got you right smack bang in the middle, and then they began to get scared.
Scared of what?
Scared of what people might know. Something was rotten in Wirtz and Company. Old man Wirtz knew what it was, and so he was killed to keep him from talking. Either Debbie Ames knew where the rottenness was, or somebody thought she did, which was just as bad. So she got killed. Now they killed everybody who could blab except for just one person.
Who's that?
You. My guess is they'll try to kill you next. You'd be a whole lot better off in jail than running around loose. Why don't you let me lock you up, Rex? I'm not kidding.
I can take care of myself, Eddie, I said. Where does Joe Gillian come into the picture?
We don't exactly know, but we're beginning to think he's mixed up with the racket somehow or other. He may be in the dope business. He may be a booze smuggler. We're getting a little bit on him now and then, mostly from Hot Springs, and it adds up. Our best bet now is dope. Maybe he's hot all of a sudden and scared to show himself.
How come his licenses were in Wirtz's pockets?
That's no strain. If a guy wants to lose himself, all he has to do is pass a couple of identity cards around to the boys, with a simple request that they be planted on a stiff. Sooner or later, Joe Gillian turns up dead, and Bill Smith, or whatever his square handle is still very much alive.
And how about Coggy?
I'd like to talk about Coggy, he said. I'd just like to sit down with him and have a good heart-to-heart talk.
And what are you going to do while you're waiting for him to drop by with nothing but conversation on his mind?
You want to know what I'm going to do, Chief? He slowed the car and stopped for a red light. I'm going to send a gang of guys over to Wirtz and Company warehouse first thing in the morning and check every case of whiskey or gin or whatever they have all the way back to the grain it was made from. I'm going to know when it was loaded aboard ship, when and where it was unloaded, and the name of every man who handled it. And maybe I can find out how much of it's stolen cargo. And then maybe I can find out who stole it.
That sounds like a hell of a lot of work, I said.
That's how police work is, Rex. Finding the needles in the haystacks, and 9 times out of 10 the needles you find aren't the ones you want. Here's where you live. Let's go up.
No, you don't need to come with me.
The hell I don't. I told you you're the last one on the list, and it's my job to keep you from getting rubbed off. And I'll see you in your sack before I say goodnight.
Nobody was in my apartment. Eddie left, and I locked the door and checked the chain, and when I went to bed I locked the bedroom door and kept my gun handy.
But nothing happened, and when the sun came up in the morning, I was hale, hearty, and safe. There isn't much to tell about the hearing at 9 o'clock. The police had evidently put their heads together and decided not to press any charges against me. Charlie Maddox, my lawyer, talked with the assistant district attorney, and then came back and told me I could shove off. "They say they don't have enough evidence to hold you, Rex." "Thanks, Charlie," I said. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "You'd be in jail," he said. "The only thing that kept you out is that you were smart enough to call me. Just one little thing." "What's that?" I asked. "Your bill?" "No, don't worry about my bill. But if I were you, I wouldn't suddenly decide to leave town without checking with the cops. They might prefer to have you handy." "I'm staying here until this whole thing is cleaned up," I said. "You couldn't get me out of town on a bet." "Smart guy," he said. "Good luck." We walked outside together, and he jumped in a cab to go back to his office. I started walking, going no place in particular. Some of the things Eddie Zimmer had told me that night before were still sorting themselves out in my head. One was the little item of being on the list for killing. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for someone to come and kill me, that was certain. Another item was the information about liquor being stolen up around Pier 90. And the third thing I was thinking about was Coggy. All this deep brain work finally stirred itself into the bright idea that I should go around town asking for Coggy, which would put me right out in the open where anybody who wanted to kill me could find me. Out in the open, I thought, I would be safer than backed into a corner. Maybe I could meet Coggy halfway and head on. I went back to my apartment and checked the door carefully before I put my key in the lock, to make sure it hadn't been opened while I was away. Everything was okay. I went to the bottom bureau drawer, opened a box, and unwrapped a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver with a 3.5-inch barrel. I didn't want any little .32. I wanted something that would pack a punch, and the Magnum was my baby. The New York waterfront was sort of out of my territory. I'd never done any security work for shipping firms and didn't exactly know where or how to start. A map of New York showed me where Pier 90 was, and a quick look in the telephone book told me that the Waterfront Commission had something they called an Employment Information Center on West 56th Street, right up from Pier 96. That seemed like a good place to start. A bus took me uptown, and I walked west on 56th Street, past a taxi garage on one side and a big automobile repair shop on the other, until I came to a set of 2 double doors and a sign that said it was the place I was looking for. I went inside and found I was in a bare, low-ceilinged room that might have been an old stable. At the far end was a counter that ran the whole way across the room, and I walked up and leaned against it. On the other side of the counter, to my left, was a glassed-in office. A man was sitting at a desk, looking at the morning paper. I judged he was the man in charge and didn't disturb him. Right in front of me was a table with 3 people sitting around it drinking coffee. The clock on the wall behind them said 10:20. There were 3 large blackboards on the wall, too. Each had a headline lettered across the top that said, "Hatch Gang, available date, blank." The date was written in blank space with chalk. There was a lot of stuff on the blackboard that I didn't understand. At the far right, all the way at the end of the counter, a man in a dirty red sweatshirt was standing with his head resting on his arms, which were folded on the counter. He seemed to be sleeping, and I thought maybe he was the boy who got paid for keeping the deck clean. Then I looked at him again and saw he was wearing a big black pistol in a shiny holster, and had a white police whistle hanging from his belt. He was a guard. Nobody paid any attention to me until I coughed loudly a couple of times. Then one of the coffee drinkers got up, came over, and gave me a fishy look, and asked if I wanted anything. I told him I was a private detective and was trying to locate a man known as Coggy. "Wait a minute," he said, and walked into the office and said something to the man who was reading the paper. Then he came back to me. "What was it you wanted?" "My name is Rex Howard," I repeated. "I'm a private detective, and I'm looking for a waterfront character called Coggy. Did you ever hear of him?" "Just a minute," he said, and walked back into the office and talked to the man there. Then he came back. "Mr. Mulligan will be with you in a minute." He went back to his coffee drinking. In 4.5 minutes, by the clock on the wall, Mr. Mulligan came out of the office. I gave him my best smile, told him who I was and what I wanted. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't give you that information." "Well," I said, "I'd like to get a job as a longshoreman. Can you tell me what I have to do or where I have to go?" "I'm afraid I can't answer that question," he said. For a place that called itself an information center, it was a darn poor spot to get an answer. I finally gave up in disgust and walked out. I turned toward the waterfront itself, went into the first saloon I came to, and ordered a beer. "You ever hear of a guy known as Coggy?" I asked the bartender. "Who?" he said.
There was a deckhand fell off a railroad tug about 7 months ago and drowned. They called him Foggy on account of how he was so thick. But that ain't the one you want, is it?" I thanked him and nursed the beer for a while. 2 roughly dressed men wandered in to have a beer. They said they didn't know any Coggy either. The same answer came up everywhere I went. Saloons, diners, guards on the docks, longshoremen knocking off for lunch. I even met a fellow who had been with me on the Boxer, a hard-shelled old gunner's mate named Juan Carmentini. We gave each other the big hello. He was working on the docks. "What do you do down here, Rex?" he asked. "You look for work here, too?" "No," I said. "I'm looking for a guy named Coggy. You ever hear of him?" "Coggy, you say? No. What do you want with him?" "I want to talk to him. Come across the street and I'll buy you a drink." "Hell, Carmen, it must have been almost 15 years since I last saw you. How have you been?" "Fine, Rex, fine. Everything's okay with Juan. Good job, good wife, 6 bambinos." We walked across the street into a bar, and he ordered whiskey with a beer on the side. I was satisfied with beer alone. Yes, everything's fine. How have you been, Rex? Where you go after you leave the old Boxer? What a bucket, huh?" He was talking fast. "Back to tin cans. Then I put in a hitch on the beach in Frisco, and then I went back to sea on a transport until I retired." "What do you do for work now, huh?" "I'm a private cop," I began. Juan swallowed his whiskey, gulped the beer down in a great hurry, and turned away. "Thanks, Rex," he said quickly. "Thanks. I gotta get back to work." And he was through the door and out of my sight before I could give the bartender the money I owed him for the drinks. It was along about 5 o'clock when I decided to call it a day. I'd been in every place along the waterfront between 45th Street and Pier 99. Nobody knew anything about Coggy, or if they did, they weren't telling me. But everybody knew I was looking for Coggy. I had made sure of that. Now my groundwork was laid. I stopped to watch the unloading of a British freighter at Pier 91. And then I recognized the boss on the forward hatch. It was my old friend Smiley, the man who had given me 60 bloody purple stripes across my back. All of a sudden, I feel good. "Say," I said to the pier guard, "isn't that old Smiley up there on the forward hatch?" "Smiley Street," he said. "Sure, that's him." "I'll be darned," I went on. "Good old Smiley. I haven't seen him in a month of Sundays. What time does he knock off work on this job?" "Oh, they ought to be finished up there in another hour or 2. You want me to tell him you're here?" "No," I said. "I'll be back. I have to see a man, but I'll be back. You haven't seen Smiley's old pal Piggy, have you?" "Oh, he loaded his truck out of here yesterday to take a trip to Rochester. He ought to be back tonight or tomorrow. You a friend of his, too?" "Yeah." I offered him a cigarette, took one myself. "I used to play around with both of those guys. I'm glad to find where they're hanging out. Take it easy." "Same to you." I walked away, making sure that Smiley couldn't see me, practically tingling with excitement. In 2 hours, the guard had said, in 2 hours he would surely be finished with the unloading and would walk across the street and I'd be waiting for him. Juan Carmentini came across the sidewalk toward me, his eyes on the concrete. I stopped, expecting him to speak to me. I called him by name, but he kept walking steadily on. As he passed, I heard him whisper, "Look out, Rex. Look out, Rex. Look out, Rex." I knew enough not to run after him and asked him what he was talking about. The word was around, and somebody was plotting to get me. My friend was warning me to go, but I had business and had to stay. I started looking for a place where I could wait and watch for Smiley to walk off the pier, but where I'd at least have my stern protected in case anybody was planning to sneak in on me. The place I found was in a crummy little restaurant at a table in the front, where I could sit in the corner and look out the window at the entrance to Pier 91. There were some dusty fly-specked curtains at the window, so nobody was likely to spot me from outside. The restaurant was mostly a saloon with a long dark bar stretching back to the kitchen door. Beside the kitchen door were 2 other doors, one marked ladies and the other gents. "What can I get for you?" the bartender called to me as I sat down. "You got a cup of coffee?" We were the only 2 people in the room. "I guess so," he said, and disappeared through the kitchen door. He came back in half a minute or so with a cup in his hand and put it on the table in front of me. "You want anything else?" "No, thanks. This'll be fine. Don't you ever have any more customers than this?" We'll fill up when they finish working that ship across the way. The whole gang will come busting in here for a quick one before they go home. That's a dime for the coffee." I gave him the dime and stirred the sugar into the weak stuff he called coffee. I didn't know whether I wanted to take on Smiley and 2 or 3 hatch gangs all at once or not. The spoon made a monotonous noise as I kept stirring the sugar long after it had dissolved. "You waiting for somebody?" the bartender asked. "Yeah," I told him. "Anybody I know?" he persisted. "I don't think so." I drank half the coffee. "If I knew who he was, I might be able to tell you if he was going to be here or not." "I don't know myself whether he'll be here. He may not come this way at all." "You a cop or something?" he wanted to know. "Do I look like a cop? Take a look at my feet. Are they flat?" I pushed my leg toward him. You never can tell," he muttered. "There ain't going to be any trouble in here, is there?" "I don't think there'll be any trouble at all," I assured him. "I'm just waiting for a friend of mine." "Oh," he said, "for a friend. Why didn't you say so in the first place? Have some more coffee?" "No, thanks." I looked at my watch. It had been an hour and a half since I had seen Smiley. I peered through the window. It was beginning to get dark. Across the street they were rigging in the booms on the freighter, and I knew the unloading was over. The hair on the back of my neck began to tickle. I got up and walked out of the restaurant. I couldn't sit there in that chair for another minute with the curious bartender looking at me, or I would have blown a gasket. Anyhow, the street was dark enough for protection by this time. I was leaning against one end of a parked and empty truck when the gang started to stream off Pier 91. Big men and little men, men in rough clothes and Sharpies, all laughing and shouting, and most of them swinging their big longshoremen's hooks with the wicked pointed ends as they hurried along. Some of them walked to the bus stop and waited there. More started walking across town. A few had their own cars, which soon filled up with their friends. Most of them seemed to be heading for the bar that I'd just left. It was in this group that I spotted Smiley. He was as I remembered him, my size and husky. He was wearing an undershirt, and the muscles in his chest and arms bunched as he walked along. He and the gang with him, about 18 or 20 of them, passed the other end of the truck behind which I was standing, and went into the restaurant. I watched them line up at the bar while I made up my mind what to do and how to do it. Smiley solved the problem for me. He shouted his order at the busy bartender and then headed for the door marked Gents. As he opened that door, I opened the front door and walked into the bar room. Nobody paid any attention to me as I went back and into the Gents room. There was a hook on the inside to latch the door, and I dropped the hook into its eye. Smiley was washing his hands and face in the washstand. He looked into the mirror as I came in, and at first he didn't seem to recognize the reflection that he saw. "Smiley," I said softly. "Remember me?" "Just a minute," he said. "I got soap in my eye." "It's me, Smiley," I said. "Me, Rex Howard. The guy with 60 cuts across his back. Turn around, you son of a bitch, and get your teeth knocked down your throat." He swung around with a knife in his hand, and no more soap in his eye than I had. He knew how to handle a knife, too, and the first thing I knew he had sliced a hole in the light sport jacket I was wearing, which wasn't the way I had planned things at all. Instead of fisticuffs, we were playing for real. Well, I'd been in and out of Sasebo, Japan during the Korean action, and I learned everything the Japanese judo guys could teach me, and a lot of other dirty tricks besides. Smiley ducked into a crouch to get away from a blow I purposefully threw wild at his head and started to come up toward my guts with the knife. I banged him under his jaw with my knee and knocked his head back so hard I thought his neck would snap. At the same time, I grabbed his knife-holding hand at the wrist and gave it a quick twist. The knife clattered to the deck and a couple of bones in his wrist crunched. I knew it must have hurt him like hell, but all he did was grunt. I clubbed him across the nose with the side of my left hand and smashed it all over his face. The blood started to run down into his mouth, and he spat it out against the wall, his bright eyes glowing hatred and pain. "Fight, you bastard!" I snapped at him. "Fight or fall down on the deck and let me kick your ribs in, and stomp your kidneys to a pulp." His breath kind of whistled through the wreckage of his nose. He backed up against the wall as I crowded toward him, and then suddenly he pushed himself out and hurled his full 200 pounds at me in a mighty tackle. I sidestepped, kneeing him in the ribs and smashing the heel of my hand into the small of his back as he went by. He fell on the floor. I kicked him in the ribs. He groaned, writhed, and lay still. I thought I had knocked him out. But there was fight left in him yet. He hadn't dived for me. He had dived for his knife. Although he had taken some terrible punishment as he went to the floor, he had the knife and I didn't realize it. He slowly pulled himself to his feet, the knife held back against his arm where I couldn't see it, and staggered to the sink and reached for the water faucet. I thought he was going to quit and be sick or something. Suddenly he turned in that quick pivot with the knife flashing from my midsection. He was out to disembowel me, and he damn near did it too. I felt a red-hot flash across my middle and pulled back as the knife glanced off the revolver in the holster on my belt. on the left side, just under my jacket. This time I kicked his shin with all my might. He couldn't keep from bending down when the pain hit him. I fetched him up straight again with a knee in the face and smashed him with 3 solid punches under the heart, which left him limp and gasping. The knife was still in his hand, and I knocked it out for the second time. I measured his bloody face carefully and clubbed him across the mouth with the edge of my hand. I felt his front teeth going into the calloused skin as they came through his lips. Another hard smash to the jaw sent him staggering backward. His feet slipped on the tiled floor and he went down, hitting his head on the washstand as he fell. That knocked him out like a light. I went over to the sink, pulled on the roller towel, cut a piece of it off with his own knife, and gagged him. As I finished fastening the piece of the towel in his mouth, somebody started pounding on the door. "Hey, you guys! Open up and let somebody in, will you?" "Be out in just a minute," I called. I looked at myself in the mirror. There wasn't a mark on my face. My coat was cut, my shirt was slashed, and there were a couple of bloody stains on the shirt, but he had done little more than scratch me. I wasn't even breathing hard. I took his knife and broke the blade, kicked him in the ribs again, took the hook off the door, and walked out, closing it carefully behind me. There was a big guy waiting outside. He started to say something to me, but he must have seen something in my eyes that shut him up quick. He waited politely until I passed him, and then he opened the door and stepped in. I walked quickly toward the street door. All of a sudden, I heard a voice behind me call out, "God damn, he's killed him! Stop that guy!" I kept going toward the door, but I knew that everybody was looking at me, and some of them were probably coming my way. I whirled with my hand on my holstered pistol. "Just hold fast," I said. "Smiley isn't dead. If he asks what happened, tell him he's lucky. The next time I see him, it'll be worse." And I backed out of the door and ran around the corner. I ran half a block and nobody was following me. I walked to the corner and turned it, and as I passed a bar, Juan Carmentini came out. He didn't say anything to me, and I didn't say anything to him, but I followed him to a bus stop. When he got on a southbound bus, I got on too. When he got off, I got off. He walked across town. I walked across town. He stopped and sat on the steps of an old brownstone house in the Chelsea section. Then I sat down beside him. "You looking for trouble, Rex?" he asked, lighting a brown cigarette. "More or less," I said. "I just beat the hell out of a hatch boss known as Smiley Street. You ever heard of him?" "I noticed Smiley. You in trouble, you mix with him, Rex." "I'm in trouble then, Carmen. I just about killed him. Who is he?" "Works for Coggy. Whiskey stealing." "How do they do it, Carmen?" "Easy, Smiley. He's hatch boss. Checkers. They're scared of him. They don't want to get beat up, get houses burned, kids killed. Smiley, he gives them a little sign when something come out of that hold he wants. Checkers never see it come out. Write it off as breakage, maybe. Whoosh, it go in thin air like smoke." "Where does it go?" "Into truck. Coggy's truck. Or maybe everything on the up and up, only somebody puts a little mark on the truck. Same day, guy with gun gets in truck, driver gets out. Whoosh, whole truckload go in thin air, like smoke." "Who does it, just Coggy and Smiley?" "Everybody in it, Rex. Everybody on the docks. Everybody knows, and nobody says nothing. Guy's gotta live. Look at me, Rex. Wife, 6 kids. So I say to somebody what's with the stealing, who takes care of my wife and kids, Rex. They never see me no more. I talk like that, whoosh." He drew his finger across his throat. "I talk too much. Good night, Rex." "Good night, Juan. Take it easy." I walked across town until I found a taxi to take me home, and all the while I remembered the way Juan said, "Whoosh." End of chapter 6.